Bonjour, or hello. The word Mahnoomin is an Anishinaabe word meaning the good berry. It is the food that grows on water. It is called wild rice in English. Wild rice is one of two grains native to North America. The other grain is corn. The Anishinaabe peoples are known as the people of the three fires, the Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Chippewa. The Chippewa are also known as the Ojibwa. To this day, Anishinaabe peoples live throughout Michigan and the Great Lakes. Wild rice is considered a special or sacred food to the Anishinaabe peoples. It is a gift from their creator to help them with their lives. Often wild rice is the first solid food eaten by infants, and a pouch filled with wild rice is buried with people when they pass away. Today, wild rice is still eaten during feasts and celebrations throughout the year by the Anishinaabe peoples. A good harvest helps with our winter's food supply. We use special tools to harvest wild rice: a canoe, a push pole, and a pair of ricing sticks, or knockers, to gather wild rice in the wetlands of Michigan. When we say Bonjour, or hello, that helps remind us of Bonjour and our Anishinaabe migration stories. There are many versions of this story told in homes and gatherings of Anishinaabe peoples, all of them true. Our Anishinaabe migration story starts when Bonjour was told by his grandmother Nokomis to fast and journey west to find a new homeland for the Anishinaabe peoples. A turtle-shaped island will appear on the first stop of the migration. Bonjour was told to seek the sacred Magus shell for directions. Nokomis told Bonjour he would know our new homeland when he found Mahnoomin, the food that grows on the water, wild rice. After a long journey, he saw the wild rice flower next to his canoe and thought it was beautiful. He planted the seeds, but he did not know he could eat the wild rice seeds at this time. Our Anishinaabe migration stories are passed down by storytellers, oral tradition, and written down about Bonjour. As you can see from this map, the migration started on the east coast of North America, traveled down the St. Lawrence Seaway, into the Great Lakes, and into Michigan. The Anishinaabe cultural hero found a new home for the Anishinaabe peoples. Our Anishinaabe migration stories help us remember why we came to live in Michigan. The next year after planting the wild rice seeds, Bonjour recognized the plants from the beautiful flowers. He learned from the ducks how to eat the wild rice seeds and knew he had found the new Anishinaabe homelands Nokomis had told him about. Bonjour also learned how to harvest and finish or prepare the wild rice so it was good to eat and store for the long winters. In this way, the Creator helped the Anishinaabe peoples to live a good life. Wild rice grows throughout Michigan in slow-moving waters about 2 to 6 feet deep, along rivers, in shallow inland lakes, in marshes, and in swamps with a muck bottom. Wild rice stands, where it grows, are also called wild rice beds. Wild rice is an aquatic grass, about 3 to 6 feet tall, with plumes of flowers and seeds at the top. Here in this wild rice bed you can see a line of cattails near the shoreline. Cattails and wild rice often grow near each other. The trees with no leaves are dead black ash trees killed by the emerald ash borer, an invasive species. We use black ash trees to help make baskets. This is a close-up of a black ash tree that has been killed by the emerald ash borer. You can see the telltale signs of the burrows made out of the bark. Changes in the wetland environment and invasive species threaten Michigan's wetlands. It is difficult to find black ash trees in some areas of Michigan. Wild rice is an important part of our wetland environment in Michigan. Wild rice helps to maintain water quality by binding up loose soils and nutrients in the water. Many of the places wild rice used to grow are gone due to forestry, agriculture, urban development, and pollution. Many animals live near and eat wild rice. Geese like wild rice when it is young and tender during the springtime. Red-winged blackbirds begin to gather in large flocks over the wild rice beds in Michigan just before and during the harvest time period. Red-winged blackbirds also love to eat wild rice as they get ready for wintertime. We can tell when the wild rice is getting ready when we see large flocks gathering. Sports fishermen know that wherever wild rice grows, there is good fishing. Wild rice beds are home for many fish including bluegills, bass, and northern pike. Near the wild rice beds, muskrats like to make their lodges, or homes. A muskrat will use the stalks of wild rice to help construct his home in good clean water. Behind the muskrat lodge, you can see cattails. Cattails like a little shallower water than wild rice. Ducks also love to eat wild rice. Bird watchers know that many kinds of birds live and visit wild rice beds. Mute swans, trumpeter swans, black terns, eagles, and marsh hawks can all be seen. Mute swans are another invasive species that can damage wild rice beds by pulling up all the wild rice plants before they mature. If you look carefully, you can also see frogs during the daytime near wild rice beds. At night, you can hear the frogs croaking. Many kinds of insects, snails, and spiders live where wild rice beds are at. All of these animals need clean water to live and are an important part of the wetland ecosystem in Michigan. Lily pads grow near wild rice beds. In this picture, there are two kinds of lily pads, one with a large circular leaf and a yellow flower, and a smaller oval-shaped leaf. The small oval leaf lily pads begin to turn red as wild rice ripens for harvest. Purple loosestrife, the plant with the beautiful purple flower, can also be found near wild rice beds. Purple loosestrife is an invasive species that can overtake native plants that are part of a healthy wetland ecosystem in Michigan. During the life cycle of wild rice, there are 4 easy stages of development easy to see. During all stages, boat traffic, changing water levels, motorized boats, pollution and storms can damage wild rice beds. The first stage is the floating leaf stage that occurs in late May or June. The plant has sprouted underwater, and as the leaves grow, they float on the water collecting sunlight from the summer sun. The second stage is called the emergent stage. This wild rice bed is beginning to stand up during the middle of the summer. The floating leaves have collected the sun rays and the wild rice plant is getting strong and standing up. The third stage is the flowering stage. These are the male flowers, which can vary from white to scarlet red in color. Great care is taken not to disturb the wild rice beds. Individuals who take their canoes into the wild rice beds unnecessarily can harm or diminish wild rice beds. These are the beautiful flowers that Wainabuju first saw on his migration west to find the homeland for the Anishinaabe peoples. This is a close-up of the female flowers at the top of each wild rice plant. Each flower, when pollinated, will turn into a wild rice seed that will help reseed the bed for next year and continue to provide a home for many other plants and animals. The fourth stage is the seed or harvest stage. The wild rice has matured and is ready to harvest. Only the mature seeds will fall into the water or into our canoe when harvesting wild rice. When we harvest wild rice the right way, the beds will reseed themselves, and there is plenty of wild rice for birds and wildlife to enjoy. Between the third and fourth stage, we tie up bundles of wild rice so the wild rice seeds mature upside down. These bundles help to identify family or clan locations in a wild rice bed during harvest and are considered sacred. We check the bundles in the wild rice beds to determine when is the right time to harvest. The bundles also make it difficult for some birds to eat the wild rice. Once the wild rice is ready to harvest, a camp is prepared on the shores of the Wild Rice Lake. We share good stories and remember past wild rice camps. We have a ceremonial meal with the first wild rice harvested and put tobacco down in thanks. We use special tools to help us harvest the wild rice and to finish or prepare the wild rice to eat in the coming year. Here are some of the wild rice harvesting and finishing tools we use. We use many different kinds of trees found in Michigan to make our wild rice tools. There is wild rice just harvested and drying on a large sheet of birch bark. We have a pair of ricing sticks, also called knockers, made of cedar. There are 2 birch bark baskets made with red willow and black ash. The large forked stick is a push pole, used to push our canoes through the wild rice beds. This fork is cherry wood, a hardwood, fastened to a 15-foot long cedar pole. Standing in our canoes, we use forked push poles to move easily through the wild rice beds. Push poles can be made of cedar, spruce, tamarack, or balsam selected for their lightness and buoyancy. The fork at the end of the pole can be made with a hardwood such as oak, cherry, walnut, or hickory. We are looking for the ripest wild rice to harvest. Sometimes we follow the red-winged blackbirds. They know where the wild rice is ripe. To make a push pole, we notch the end of our cedar poles first to put the hardwood fork onto our pole. We drill 2 holes and use a hardwood dowel as a peg to hold them together. We are always careful when making ricing tools, and an adult is always helping. This is how we learn and pass down our ways of life to younger generations. After we peg the fork to our cedar pole, we have a push pole. We use string to wrap around where the fork and the pole are connected to help keep it strong. When ripe, we use a pair of ricing sticks made of cedar to gently bend the wild rice over the canoe to knock in the wild rice seeds. We harvest on both sides of the canoe, going from side to side with our ricing sticks as we pull through the marsh. Usually there are 2 people in a canoe facing each other to harvest. One person push pulls and one person knocks wild rice. Sometimes the people will switch positions. We use wedges and a sledgehammer to split a cedar log harvested to make ricing sticks or knockers. Knockers that you make yourself usually work better than borrowing someone else's. After the cedar log is split up, they are carved into a matching pair of ricing sticks. While making our ricing tools, it is important to be careful and make sure that there is an adult around that knows what they are doing. It is important to use the right wild rice tools when harvesting wild rice by hand. We gather birch bark in the late spring to make baskets to help with finishing and processing wild rice. There are special ways Anishinaabe peoples remove birch bark without harming the tree. Today in Michigan, it is difficult to find birch bark trees large enough to make a birch bark canoe or good lodges. Changes in the environment may be a reason why birch trees are not as big or plentiful as they once were in Michigan. Here is a birch bark basket in the middle of construction. Red willow gathered from the water's edge are used to help strengthen the rim of the basket so it can be used to help clean or winnow wild rice. The holes are drilled with an awl and then laced with black wax thread. The corners are cut off before finishing. This is another birch bark basket we use to help with finishing or preparing wild rice to eat and store. Thin black ash splints are used to lace a red willow to the rim of the birch bark basket instead of black wax thread. Once a wild rice has been harvested, we empty our canoes out onto a large tarp and clean out any twigs or insects that are in the wild rice. Today many people use aluminum or fiberglass canoes, but our push-poles and knockers are handmade to be careful and gentle in the wild rice beds. In this way, we treat the wild rice with respect and help ensure a good harvest. Next, we spread the wild rice out to dry right away and continue to clean it. We use our oars and push poles to hold down the edges of the tarps so the wind does not blow them away. The wild rice needs to dry for 3 or 4 days. If it rains, you need to bring it indoors to keep drying. Someone is always watching the wild rice dry at camp. After the wild rice is dried, we place it in a large pot or cauldron in a fire to parch it. This pot is copper, one of the metals that occur naturally in Michigan. Parching the wild rice helps preserve the wild rice for storage and loosens the husks on each wild rice seed so that it can be removed easily. You can also use a large cast iron pot or a galvanized wash tub to parch wild rice. The wild rice must be stirred constantly to make sure it does not burn. It can take 10 to 15 minutes to parch up wild rice, depending on how hot the fire is and how you like your wild rice. The parched wild rice is then placed on a piece of leather covering a shallow hole dug in the ground. This one is about 16 inches in diameter and about 8 inches deep. We used our push poles as handrails, but 2 branches tied to a tree will also work. Then we dance on the wild rice with leather moccasins to separate the hulls from the wild rice seed we like to eat. Some people call this hulling or jigging the wild rice. This is another way we have used to hull wild rice. Notice that we are not using birch bark this time to help us finish the wild rice. There are many different ways people use to finish wild rice, some using mechanical methods. Anishinaabe people do not use mechanical methods to harvest wild rice because it is damaging to the wild rice beds. Once the parched wild rice has been hulled or jigged, loosening the husks, it is placed in a winnowing basket to separate the husks from the wild rice. This process of jigging and winnowing is sometimes repeated to get all the wild rice hulls loosened. Now the wild rice is winnowed. It is tossed into the air very carefully and caught again. The wind helps to blow away the loosened husks, and the heavier wild rice seeds fall back into the winnowing basket. It takes skill to be able to winnow wild rice well. After all of the drying, parching, jigging, and winnowing, the wild rice is hand cleaned to remove any last bits of husks from the wild rice. This is what finished wild rice looks like. It is now ready to eat and to be stored for the coming year. It takes a lot of work by many peoples to make good wild rice. We always give thanks to the Creator for the sacred gift of wild rice for our peoples, and for helping Wanabushu find Mahnoomin, the good berry, the food that grows on the water. Wild rice helps our peoples, the four-legged ones, the winged ones, the ones that live in the water, and the insects, live good lives in our forests and wetlands in Michigan. Let's cook Mahnoomin. This is a basic wild rice recipe. The ingredients are a half cup of dry wild rice cleaned, 2 cups of water, 2 cups of chicken broth can be substituted, a half teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of butter, optional. Add all ingredients to a 2-quart pot with a lid and bring to a slow boil. Cook approximately 30 to 45 minutes, checking frequently, or follow specific directions provided with the wild rice. Remove from the stove and drain any remaining liquid. It makes 4 to 6 servings. Wild rice can vary in cooking time depending on the variety and the way it is finished. Overcooking wild rice can leave it mushy, a favorite amongst some though. Once cooked, wild rice can be stored up to 1 week in a covered container in your refrigerator. It can be eaten as is, or added to your favorite vegetable or casserole dish, or to your favorite soup or stew recipes. Cream of chicken and wild rice soup. First, make sure you have all of the ingredients ready. Then, in a 3-quart pot, mix the chicken broth, corn, carrots, celery, cooked wild rice, onions, garlic, thyme, bay leaf, and a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Bring to a boil. Reduce heat, cover, and simmer on low for 1 hour. While the soup is simmering, melt the butter, stir in the flour, then the half and half. Cook and stir constantly for 1 minute. Slowly add the half and half mixture to the wild rice mixture while it is simmering. Stir in the chicken and heat for the remainder of the hour's simmering time. This makes 4 to 6 servings. Wild rice berries and maple syrup. Mix all ingredients together and stir until well mixed. Serve warm as is, or with a scoop of ice cream. It can also be served cold. You can substitute 1 cup of brown sugar for 1 cup of maple syrup. You can also substitute a 12-ounce package of mixed frozen berries, thawed to room temperature, or 2 cups total of your favorite berry and fruit mixture. Make 6 servings. Mahnoomin, the food that grows on the water. Brought to you by the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe, the Environmental Protection Agency, Environmental Advocates LLC, and Jesse Dittmer.